The whisper spread through the candlelit drawing room like a blade sliding beneath silk. "Lady Byron has come!" The name alone silenced the conversation, not because she was beloved, but because she was feared. Annabella Milbank Byron stood near the doorway, her gloved hands clasped tightly before her, her posture perfectly composed despite the eyes fixed upon her from every corner of the chamber. 8 years. 8 years had passed since she had left her husband. 8 years since London had declared her the cold woman who destroyed the most adored man in England. And still they stared, some with curiosity, some with disdain, some with quiet fascination. Across the room a group of young ladies leaned close together, whispering behind fluttering fans. "That is her. The woman who abandoned Lord Byron. They say she never loved him at all." Annabella heard every word. She had grown accustomed to it. The chandeliers above shimmered with golden light, illuminating the polished floor of the aristocratic salon. Dukes, viscounts, and ladies of the ton moved through the room in careful circles of reputation and ambition. This was the world that had once worshipped her husband, George Gordon Byron, the most desired man in England, the poet whose beauty and brilliance had turned drawing rooms into temples, the man half the women in London would have married without hesitation. Annabella had been the one who actually did, and for that society had never forgiven her, because she had done something unforgivable. She had left him. The musicians at the far end of the room began a slow waltz. Conversation resumed, though softer now. Curious glances followed her like shadows. Annabella moved toward the tall windows overlooking the dark London street. The night air beyond the glass trembled with rain. She preferred rain. Rain kept people indoors. Rain muffled gossip, but tonight there was no escaping it. Because the news had arrived that afternoon. Lord Byron was dead. The announcement had traveled through London like wildfire. Some wept, some romanticized it instantly. The tragic poet, the fallen genius, the hero who had died in Greece fighting for freedom. But Annabella had felt something entirely different when she heard. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter, something painful, something unfinished. A servant approached quietly. "Lady Byron, someone has come to see you." Annabella turned. The servant stepped aside. A man stood in the doorway behind him. Weathered coat, travel-worn boots, face pale with exhaustion. She recognized him instantly. William Fletcher, her husband's valet, the man who had served Byron longer than anyone alive. The room grew silent again. Everyone understood what his presence meant. News from Greece. Annabella stepped forward slowly. "Mr. Fletcher," she said softly. The valet bowed his head. "My lady." His voice trembled slightly. They moved into a smaller adjoining room away from the listening crowd. The door closed behind them. For a moment neither spoke. Then Fletcher removed his hat. "My lady, his lordship is gone." Annabella nodded once. "I know." The silence stretched. Outside, rain struck the tall windows. Fletcher swallowed. He suffered greatly in the end. Annabella's fingers tightened slightly against one another. But as he spoke, her breath caught. "He tried to speak?" "Yes, my lady." Hope flickered painfully across her face. "What did he say?" Fletcher hesitated. His expression shifted with helpless regret. "He tried to leave a message." Annabella stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "For whom?" The valet's answer was quiet. "For you and for Miss Ada." Her composure shattered. She sank slowly into the nearest chair as though her strength had suddenly abandoned her. 8 years. 8 years of silence. 8 years of believing the man she once loved would never speak her name again. "What were his words?" she whispered. Fletcher looked at the floor. "He was delirious with fever, my lady." Annabella's voice trembled. "But he said something." "Yes." "What did he say?" Fletcher closed his eyes briefly. "He tried to speak, but the words were broken. I could not understand them." Annabella's breathing grew uneven. "You must remember something." "I wish I did." She rose suddenly, crossing the room in 2 quick steps. Her hand seized the valet's coat. "Please," she whispered desperately, "think." The great Lady Byron, the woman London called heartless, fell to her knees before him. Her body shook with silent sobs. "Mr. Fletcher, what did he say?" The man could only shake his head. "I am sorry, my lady." The message had died with him, and something inside Annabella Byron broke with it. Because after everything, after the cruelty, after the humiliation, after the silence, there had still been one question left between them. And now she would never know the answer. The rain had not stopped when William Fletcher finally left the house. Annabella remained where she had collapsed beside the chair. For a long moment she did not move. The fire in the small drawing room burned quietly, casting soft amber light across the walls. Outside, carriage wheels splashed through the wet London streets. Lord Byron was dead. The words felt unreal. Across Europe, newspapers would already be writing the story. The fallen poet, the romantic exile, the tragic hero who died fighting for liberty. They would praise him. They always had. They always would. And she would remain the villain. Annabella slowly rose from the floor. Her knees trembled beneath her as she crossed toward the window. Rain streaked the glass like tears. 8 years earlier, she had stood at another window, in another house, watching snow fall across Piccadilly Terrace while her marriage collapsed around her. She closed her eyes, and memory dragged her backward. London, spring of 1812. The ballroom at Lady Melbourne's townhouse glittered with chandeliers and polished silver mirrors. Every person who mattered in society had gathered there that evening, because he was expected. George Gordon Byron. Even before he arrived, the room buzzed with anticipation. He is the most extraordinary man in England. They say women faint when he enters a room. Have you read his poem? Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, of course. I heard the entire first printing sold out in 3 days. Fame had come to Byron like a storm. One morning he had been an obscure young lord. The next he was the most talked about man in England. Hostesses fought for the privilege of inviting him. Young women copied lines of his poetry into their diaries. Men quoted him at dinner tables. Society had never seen anything like it. They called it Byromania. Annabella Milbank sat quietly on a sofa near the far wall observing the spectacle. She wore a simple ivory gown without jewels. Her dark hair was arranged plainly. She looked more like a scholar than a society beauty, which in truth she was. At 20 years old, Annabella possessed one of the sharpest minds in England. While other young ladies practiced embroidery, she studied mathematics. She could discuss Newton's laws. She read philosophy in 3 languages. Her tutor, a former Cambridge professor, had once declared her intellect equal to many of his university students. Most men found it unsettling. Annabella found it practical, which was why she was not standing with the eager crowd near the ballroom entrance. She was watching, learning, waiting. Then the doors opened. A ripple passed through the room, and he entered. Lord Byron moved slowly across the marble floor. Dark curls framed his pale face. His gray eyes held a strange intensity that seemed to pull attention toward him. Women leaned closer as he passed. Men straightened their coats. Even the musicians faltered slightly before recovering. Annabella noticed something else. The limp. He walked quickly, attempting to disguise the deformity in his foot. But it was there, a shadow within the performance, a wound he carried into every room. Byron greeted acquaintances with effortless charm. Within minutes, laughter circled him. Admiration followed him like perfume. He seemed perfectly aware of the effect. Annabella watched silently. He was beautiful, but there was something else beneath the beauty. Something restless, something dangerous. A man who seemed perpetually on the edge of boredom, as though ordinary happiness would never satisfy him. She had nearly decided he was not worth her attention when he suddenly looked across the room. Their eyes met. Just for a moment, something unreadable passed across his face. Curiosity. Because she was not smiling at him. She was studying him, the way one studies a complex problem. Later that night, Annabella wrote to her mother. Her description would become famous. He is a very bad, very good man. She did not yet know how right she was, nor how costly that insight would become, because within 2 years, the most dangerous man in England would ask her to marry him, and Annabella Milbank would make the mistake that changed the rest of her life. She believed she could save him. The first time Lord Byron proposed to Annabella Milbank, she refused him. It happened quietly. No witnesses, no drama, only a message delivered through Lady Melbourne during the autumn of 1812. Byron, accustomed to admiration, expected acceptance. Instead, the answer returned within 2 days. No. London found the refusal astonishing. A man half the women in England adored had been rejected by the quiet mathematician from County Durham. But Annabella felt no triumph, only relief, because she had seen something in Byron that others refused to see. Beneath the charm, beneath the beauty, beneath the intoxicating fame, there was turbulence, a darkness that felt unfinished, and Annabella Milbank did not trust unfinished men. Yet Byron did not forget her. If anything, the refusal intrigued him. In drawing rooms where women fought for his attention, Annabella had done something rare. She had not wanted it. Their correspondence began soon after, letters at first polite and intellectual, then longer, more personal. Annabella wrote about morality, faith, and philosophy. Byron wrote about restlessness, about the strange emptiness that followed success. About nights when sleep would not come, their letters traveled between Seaham Hall and London through the damp English countryside. Weeks passed between replies, but slowly a strange connection formed. Annabella believed she was helping him. She believed she was guiding a troubled mind toward something steadier. Byron called her Year, the princess of parallelograms. The nickname amused him. The woman who could tame numbers might also tame a man. At least that was the illusion. What Annabella did not know, what almost no one knew, was what Byron was doing during those same months. Because while he wrote thoughtful letters about the state of his soul, he was entangled in one of the most dangerous secrets in England. Her name was Augusta Lee, Byron's half-sister. They had grown up apart, but when they reunited as adults, their relationship became something society could never accept. Rumors moved quietly through aristocratic circles, whispers in candlelit salons, half-finished sentences between friends. No one dared speak plainly, yet suspicion hung in the air like smoke. Then in April of 1814, Augusta gave birth to a daughter. The child's resemblance to Byron was impossible to ignore. The rumors grew louder. Byron's debts were also rising. His fame had not brought him fortune. Newstead Abbey, the ancestral estate he had inherited, was crumbling under years of neglect. Creditors waited outside his doors. Reputation, money, stability, all of it was slipping. And Byron understood something very clearly. He needed respectability. He needed a wife. Not merely any wife. A woman admired by society. A woman intelligent enough to impress. A woman morally beyond question. Annabella Milbank was perfect. In September of 1814, he proposed again. This time not through intermediaries. This time directly. The letter arrived at Seaham Hall on a gray afternoon overlooking the North Sea. Annabella read it slowly beside the window. Her father's estate stretched toward the cliffs beyond. Cold wind swept across the water. She had refused him once. She knew his flaws. She had sensed his danger. And yet, she also believed something else. That the darkness inside him could be healed. That patience and faith could change him. That love might succeed where discipline had failed. It was a noble belief, and a catastrophic one. Annabella Milbank wrote her reply that evening. This time the answer was different. Yes. Within 4 months she would stand beside him at the altar. Within hours of the wedding carriage leaving the church, she would discover the terrible truth. The man she had promised to save had never wanted saving. Snow fell across Seaham Hall on the morning of the wedding, January 2nd, 1815. The wind from the North Sea rattled the tall windows of the Milbank estate as guests gathered quietly inside the chapel. It was not the grand society event many had expected. No glittering crowds, no parade of fashionable aristocrats, only a small circle of family and trusted acquaintances. Lord Byron stood near the altar in dark formal dress, his expression unreadable. Even in the quiet chapel, his presence commanded attention. Tall, dark-haired, strikingly handsome despite the slight limp he tried to hide. The most desired man in England, the man women wrote poetry about in secret, and he was marrying her. Annabella walked down the aisle in a white muslin gown trimmed with lace. No jewels, no theatrical display, just calm dignity. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached him. Byron's gray eyes studied her face for a moment. Something flickered there. Not joy, not tenderness, something colder. But the vows were spoken. The priest declared them husband and wife, and with that simple sentence, Annabella Milbank ceased to exist as an independent woman under English law. Everything she owned now belonged to him. Her fortune, her property, even the legal rights to any children she bore. Marriage had made her his, whether she understood the danger or not. The wedding breakfast passed politely. Guests toasted the couple. Laughter filled the dining room. But as afternoon faded into evening, snow began falling harder. It was time for the newlyweds to depart. A carriage waited outside to take them to Halnaby Hall, another Milbank property 40 miles away. Servants loaded trunks. Candles flickered in the cold wind. Annabella stepped into the carriage beside her new husband. The door closed, and the transformation happened instantly. Byron's entire demeanor changed. The warmth he had shown during the ceremony vanished like mist. His face hardened. His eyes darkened. He leaned back against the seat and began humming softly, then singing. Not a joyful melody, something strange. Almost mocking. Annabella watched him carefully. "George," she said quietly. He laughed. A sharp, unpleasant sound. "Well, my lady," he said, "now we are married." His gaze drifted toward the window where snow blurred the passing countryside. "I suppose I must congratulate myself." Annabella felt a chill unrelated to the winter air. The carriage wheels rattled over frozen roads. Church bells rang faintly in the distance as they passed through Durham. Celebrating the union. Byron's expression darkened further. Then he said something she would never forget. "I married you to make you pay." Annabella stared at him. "For what?" "For everything." The words were delivered with careless cruelty. Then he added quietly, "Now that I have you in my power, you shall feel it." The carriage continued through the snow. Annabella sat perfectly still, her heart beating faster with each passing mile. The man beside her was not the one who had written those thoughtful letters. Not the restless soul she had hoped to guide toward peace. This was someone colder, more dangerous, a stranger wearing the same face. Night had fallen when they finally reached Halnaby Hall. Servants waited at the door holding lanterns. They noticed the silence immediately. Byron stepped from the carriage first, without offering his wife a hand, without looking back. He limped through the doorway alone. Annabella stepped down slowly after him. Snow crunched beneath her shoes. The servants exchanged uneasy glances, because even they could see it. The stricken expression on the new Duchess of Byron's face, and the terrible truth no one else yet knew. The marriage had lasted less than a day, and already the nightmare had begun. Halnaby Hall stood silent beneath deep winter snow. From the outside it looked almost peaceful. A handsome country estate surrounded by frozen fields and bare trees, its windows glowing softly with candlelight. Inside, the newlyweds began what Byron mockingly called their triple honeymoon. There was nothing sweet about it. For the first few days, Byron behaved almost normally. At breakfast, he was witty. At dinner, he was charming. He spoke of poetry, politics, philosophy exactly as he had in their letters. Annabella began to believe that the carriage ride had simply been nerves, a moment of bitterness, a passing storm. Then the storm returned. Suddenly, without warning. One evening, as they sat beside the fire, Byron began speaking about his half-sister Augusta. Not plainly, never plainly, but in strange fragments. "You would like Augusta," he said casually. "She understands me far better than most people." Annabella said nothing. Byron watched her closely. "Perhaps you will meet her soon." His smile held something unsettling. Days later he told her again, "She knows every corner of my heart." The words lingered in the quiet room. Annabella felt unease spreading slowly through her chest, because it was not the affection of a brother speaking. It was something else, something intimate, something wrong. The pattern continued, moments of warmth, then sudden cruelty. Byron seemed almost fascinated by the effect he had on her. One afternoon he read poetry aloud in a voice so beautiful it filled the entire hall with emotion. That same evening he refused to speak to her for hours. Sometimes he stared at her as though she were an experiment, a puzzle he intended to solve. Annabella began to feel constantly off balance. She never knew which version of her husband she would face, the charming poet, or the cold stranger. One night she gathered the courage to ask quietly, "George, are you unhappy?" He laughed. "Unhappy? My dear Annabella, unhappiness is my natural condition." He lifted his glass of brandy. "You married a man famous for it." "But we could change things," she said carefully. His gray eyes hardened. "You cannot change me." The words struck harder than anger, because they were spoken with absolute certainty. The honeymoon ended after 3 weeks. They returned to London, to the elegant house at 13 Piccadilly Terrace on Bandal, one of the most fashionable addresses in the city. Carriages rolled past the polished doors. Nobles visited. Society still adored Lord Byron. But inside the house something darker was growing. Byron's debts were worse than Annabella had imagined. Creditors arrived constantly. Angry knocks at the door. Servants whispering in the halls. And Byron drank. More every week. Brandy in the mornings. Wine late into the night. His moods became sharper. Crueler. Sometimes he told her he had never loved her. Sometimes he said she had ruined his life. Other nights he simply ignored her completely. Then one evening he announced casually, "Augusta will be staying with us." Annabella froze. "Here?" "For several weeks." His smile was deliberate. "I thought it might amuse you." When Augusta Lee arrived, the atmosphere in the house changed instantly. The two siblings shared private jokes, half-sentences, secret looks across the room. Annabella watched from the edge of her own drawing room like a stranger, and slowly she began to understand something horrifying. She was not the third person in the marriage. She was the intruder. By the autumn of 1815, the house at 13 Piccadilly Terrace had become a place of dread. From the outside, it looked magnificent. Carriages rolled past the tall Georgian windows. Gentlemen tipped their hats when Lord Byron appeared at the door. Society still adored him. Inside, however, the atmosphere had grown unbearable. Annabella was now pregnant. The knowledge had filled her with both hope and terror. Hope that a child might soften Byron's heart. Terror that the law would give him complete power over that child. and Byron seemed to understand that power perfectly. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. One evening he drank heavily at dinner and stared at her across the candlelit table. "You expect motherhood to save us," he said lazily. Annabella said nothing. "You imagine a baby will reform me." His smile was cruel. "You are very fond of mathematics, my dear wife, yet you are remarkably poor at calculations." The words stung, but she remained calm. "I only wish for peace in our home." Byron laughed softly. "Peace bores me." The nights were worse. Sometimes he paced the halls until dawn. Sometimes he forced conversation when she was exhausted. Other nights he sat in silence, drinking brandy and staring into the fire as though something inside him refused to rest. Augusta remained in the house longer than anyone thought appropriate. Weeks became months. Servants began whispering. Annabella noticed the glances exchanged in corridors. They knew. Servants always knew. One evening, Annabella found Byron and Augusta standing close together in the music room. Too close. They stopped speaking the moment she entered. Augusta left quickly, her face flushed. Byron watched his wife calmly. "You disapprove?" Annabella's voice remained steady. "I believe certain boundaries exist for a reason." Byron's expression darkened. "Morality again?" He stepped closer. "You hide behind religion and numbers as though they make you superior." "I hide behind nothing." "Oh, you do," he said quietly. "You hide behind righteousness." The tension in the room tightened like a drawn bow. Annabella felt something inside her finally breaking. "I married you because I believed you were suffering." Byron's eyes flashed. "And now?" "Now I fear you enjoy causing suffering." For a moment the words hung in the air between them. Something changed in Byron's face. A dangerous stillness. "You presume much." "I observe," she replied softly. The silence stretched. Then Byron leaned closer. "So you believe yourself my judge?" "No," she said, "only your wife." His voice dropped lower. "That position gives you fewer rights than you imagine." The meaning was unmistakable. Annabella felt the truth settle over her with terrible clarity. This was not a wounded man waiting to be healed. This was a man who preferred destruction. And the law, every law of England, stood firmly on his side. Later that night she sat alone in the upstairs drawing room. The city beyond the window glowed faintly in fog. Inside her the child moved for the first time. Annabella placed a hand against her stomach. A daughter she somehow knew. And suddenly a single thought rose with chilling certainty. If she stayed, this child would grow up in the same darkness. And for the first time since her wedding day, Annabella allowed herself to consider the impossible. Leaving him, Halnaby Hall stood silent beneath deep winter snow. From the outside it looked almost peaceful. A handsome country estate surrounded by frozen fields and bare trees, its windows glowing softly with candlelight. Inside, the newlyweds began what Byron mockingly called their triple honeymoon. There was nothing sweet about it. For the first few days Byron behaved almost normally. At breakfast he was witty. At dinner he was charming. He spoke of poetry, politics, philosophy exactly as he had in their letters. Annabella began to believe that the carriage ride had simply been nerves, a moment of bitterness, a passing storm. Then the storm returned. Suddenly, without warning. One evening as they sat beside the fire, Byron began speaking about his half-sister Augusta. Not plainly, never plainly, but in strange fragments. "You would like Augusta," he said casually. "She understands me far better than most people." Annabella said nothing. Byron watched her closely. "Perhaps you will meet her soon." His smile held something unsettling. Days later he told her again, "She knows every corner of my heart." The words lingered in the quiet room. Annabella felt unease spreading slowly through her chest. Because it was not the affection of a brother speaking. It was something else, something intimate, something wrong. The pattern continued. Moments of warmth, then sudden cruelty. Byron seemed almost fascinated by the effect he had on her. One afternoon he read poetry aloud in a voice so beautiful it filled the entire hall with emotion. That same evening he refused to speak to her for hours. Sometimes he stared at her as though she were an experiment, a puzzle he intended to solve. Annabella began to feel constantly off balance. She never knew which version of her husband she would face, the charming poet, or the cold stranger. One night she gathered the courage to ask quietly, "George, are you unhappy?" He laughed. "Unhappy? My dear Annabella, unhappiness is my natural condition." He lifted his glass of brandy. "You married a man famous for it." "But we could change things," she said carefully. His gray eyes hardened. "You cannot change me." The words struck harder than anger, because they were spoken with absolute certainty. The honeymoon ended after 3 weeks. They returned to London, to the elegant house at 13 Piccadilly Terrace on Bandal. one of the most fashionable addresses in the city. Carriages rolled past the polished doors. Nobles visited. Society still adored Lord Byron. But inside the house something darker was growing. Byron's debts were worse than Annabella had imagined. Creditors arrived constantly. Angry knocks at the door. Servants whispering in the halls. And Byron drank. More every week. Brandy in the mornings. Wine late into the night. His moods became sharper. Crueler. Sometimes he told her he had never loved her. Sometimes he said she had ruined his life. Other nights he simply ignored her completely. Then one evening he announced casually, "Augusta will be staying with us." Annabella froze. "Here?" "For several weeks." His smile was deliberate. "I thought it might amuse you." When Augusta Lee arrived, the atmosphere in the house changed instantly. The two siblings shared private jokes, half-sentences, secret looks across the room. Annabella watched from the edge of her own drawing room like a stranger, and slowly she began to understand something horrifying. She was not the third person in the marriage. She was the intruder.